Hey, welcome back to the channel. It's Kelsey here from astrologyhumandesign.com. I just had a sudden inspiration to film a video and talk about emotional authority through the different types. And I was inspired to talk about this because when there are certain transits that happen, it can make you an emotional authority if you're not normally an emotional authority, what we would call a non-emotional. If you have an open or undefined solar plexus, if your solar plexus center is white in your chart, that means it is open or undefined. But if it's colored in, I believe it would be brown on most websites, then that means it's your authority. You have an emotional solar plexus authority. And this is one of the hardest authorities to navigate, in my opinion, because it requires a waiting game. It requires so much presence and just feeling through emotional waves. And like I said, I experience this from time to time when there are certain transits that are in effect that impact my chart in a way in which it creates the emotional definition in my chart, and I kind of have or take on a slight energy of being that emotional authority. And so I really get to face the duality of being an emotional versus a non-emotional. And if you're not new to human design, the differences between emotional and there's a piece of trash that I'm going to pick up because don't litter. And I see a trash can up ahead. So non-emotionals, right, take on and amplify the energy and the emotions more specifically, not just energy, but the emotions of emotionals. And like I said, this intensifies when there are transits when there are transits happening that create emotional wave channels in someone's birth chart. But someone who is like an emotional authority operates that way all the time. But non-emotionals feel it more intensely than emotionals do themselves because, again, where you're open, especially if you are open in the solar plexus and the emotional center, you're not only taking in energy there, you're amplifying it. So this is why sometimes when you have within a relationship, like a couple, like for example, my parents, my dad is an emotional and my mom is a non-emotional, but she seems like the emotional one because she's taking and amplifying his emotions. So that is what can happen in dynamics with emotionals and non-emotionals. And if you're an emotional authority, thank you, then let me throw this piece of trash away and then we'll get back to the lecture here. Short lecture. And this is like me filming in the raw. Like almost got hit by a biker because I was like walking to the trash can and also talking to my phone. Totally manifesting generating right now. What was I saying? So if you're an emotional authority, then you are more familiar with your emotional waves, and they tend to like not be as clear to you that they're happening because you're so used to them, right? You're so in them. It's like what's a good example of this? It's like when when you're, okay, so you live in this house for a few years, right? And you have the same habits. You go to the bathroom, you do that, whatever, like you clean the counters, like you have the same habits. And then you move into a new house and you're like, whoa, everything's all backwards. Like you have to learn a new way of being. It's kind of like that. It's like when you're an emotional authority, you're so used to having your emotional waves that you can sometimes not be fully aware of them. And that's where the non-emotional comes in and says, hey, like, I know that you're feeling this because I feel it more intensely than you do. And it really requires a lot of awareness on both parts so that the non-emotional isn't identifying with those feelings, right, and thinking that they're theirs. So emotional authorities show up differently. Emotional authority shows up differently through the different types, the different aura types, right? And so, like, for example, I'm going to switch arms because I'm literally just holding this with my hand. So for example, an emotional manifesting generator is going to have a different emotional authority expression than a generator or a manifestor or a projector. And honestly, I feel like emotional mani-gens and emotional projectors have it the hardest, because emotional manifesting generators, you move so quickly, right? And you do things so quickly because of that defined sacral, having the connection between the sacral and the throat. You want to like act on things, especially if you have a defined spleen. Oh my gosh, right? You want to like act on things and do things and like do the things you feel like called to do whenever you get those little hits or ideas. My hair is like wild today. But that's incorrect for emotional manifesting generators. Like, if you're an emotional manifesting generator, then you're supposed to wait out your emotional waves and wait to act on the hits that you get, act on the sacral, responses that you get. You're meant to wait for clarity, and that goes for all emotionals. And the stuff is really simple, right? But we tend to overcomplicate it because we've been conditioned to be like, oh no, it's like, it can't be that simple. There's no way that it's just that simple or that easy to just like wait for clarity, and then the clarity will come. And like, if I just wait, all the opportunities will, that are aligned for me and correct for me will present themselves no matter what. But yes, it is that easy. It is that simple. And it can be done with patience, with presence, and with awareness. And so when we, with an emotional manifesting generator, it can be really hard to train yourself to wait, because again, you want to act on the splenic hits that you get if you have a defined spleen, or you want to act on the sacral responses you get as soon as you get them. But really important to not do that. I'm about to cross the street, so it might be kind of loud. And then for emotional generators, it's a similar thing. Although emotional generators, there's not that like speediness or impatience or like angstiness as much as there is with emotional manifesting generators. But still, same thing. Like, you're supposed to wait for clarity of your sacral responses and consistency of the sacral response. Like, generally, especially if you have a defined spleen, the hit or the response that you get from your sacral at first is correct, but you still want to wait. And this goes for manifesting generators as well that are emotionals. You still want to wait for clarity to just make sure that it's correct for you. Otherwise, you're going to act too soon, too quickly, and be frustrated because you acted too soon, didn't wait for that clarity, and made a quote-unquote incorrect decision for you. And then in the case of emotional projectors, I just think projectors have it hard in general because, like, you guys are really the newest evolved type in the whole system, and we, our society isn't set up for you all yet. So it's hard to be a projector right now. It's hard to follow your strategy. It's, it's very different. You guys are here to, as the new kind of CEOs and the new guides, but not all of those roles are, here yet for you to show up and lead. So it's kind of like you guys have to like conform a little bit, and it's been, anyways, that's getting off on a tangent about projectors. But emotional projectors especially, like, you really have to wait for that clarity. Like, and this goes for, all emotional authorities. Like, when you're in a low point, and that low can look different depending on your type. And this is really what inspired me to talk about this today, because when you're a manifestor, your emotional low can look like anger or grumpiness, or just like general, like, kind of almost like nihilism, and just a general or overall, like, what's the right word? I don't know what the right word is. Just kind of like a cynicism. Like, it's like a cynicism for emotional manifestors. When you guys are in a low, that's kind of what it looks like. Depending on the channel you have as your authority too, there's so much more to this. I'm really generalizing here. And then I feel like for emotional generators and manifesting generators, oh my gosh, honeysuckle. Oh, I love honeysuckle. Reminds me of my childhood. for emotional generators and manifesting generators, your emotional waves can sometimes just look like frustration or anger, or also kind of a grumpiness, especially for manifesting generators, just like a general just like bleh, or like stuckness, or a like just low energy, like feeling like lethargic, or just kind of like lost or stuck. That's kind of like the emotional low, quote unquote, for generators, or manifesting generators. And then for projectors, it looks like bitterness, it looks like resentment, it looks like feeling kind of also cynical and being like, nothing's working out for me, no one sees me, no one recognizes me, no one like wants my gifts, that type of energy. And then, like I already mentioned, for emotional manifestors, it's like a grumpiness. And then the high, especially for manifestors, generators, and manifesting generators, looks like excitement. Looks like, oh my gosh, yeah, like I want to do all these things. I got this, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, again, not correct for you all to make decisions from either of those places. It's really important for you to wait until you feel even keel. You feel like there's clarity, and you feel like, you know, you've had time to think about it, you've had time to weigh out the pros and the cons or whatever, and not make a spontaneous or brash decision. And that is literally what is correct for you all. And I think I covered, that's all. Reflectors can't be emotionals because reflectors are always lunar authority. But that's just kind of like my 2 cents on what it means to be an emotional authority through the different types, and also what an emotional low looks like through the different types. I think in general, when people talk about emotional authority and they're like, oh, you go through emotional lows, people think, oh, sadness or despair or depression. And it's like, yeah, it can show up as that, but not always. So that is an expansion on what that can look like. Let me know in the comments how you feel like your emotional wave shows up and what helps you to come to clarity through your emotional waves. Because again, it's going to differ for everybody depending on your particular authority channel and what makes you an emotional, the channel that makes you an emotional. So let me know in the comments. I'll respond to as many as I can. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video.